Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a woman in my mid-20s and I've been working at this retail store for about 3.5 years now. It's a decent job, not exactly my dream career, but it helps pay the bills while I'm working on my business degree. My boyfriend works there too, which makes the long hours a bit more bearable, even though we work different shifts most of the time. One of the perks of working closing shifts is that I can sleep in and take my time getting ready. I love doing my makeup. It's like my personal form of art and self-expression. I usually go all out when I have late shifts, experimenting with different eyeshadow looks and techniques I've learned from watching tutorials online. There's this one co-worker, a man in his 30s, who I've only had brief interactions with over the years. Nothing memorable, just the usual casual greetings that you exchange with people you work with but don't really know. He works in a different department, so our paths rarely cross. That all changed last week during my closing shift. I was wearing one of my favorite makeup looks, a sparkly purple and gold eyeshadow combination that I'd spent a good 30 minutes perfecting. I was busy restocking shelves and doing inventory when he suddenly appeared beside me. He started by saying he needed to tell me something. When I hesitantly acknowledged him, I was already getting weird vibes from his tone, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. He had the nerve to tell me that he thought women looked better without makeup, saying it was just too much. He even had the audacity to ask if I used to be a dancer, adding that a natural face was better. The whole time he was scrunching up his nose like he'd smelled something awful, staring directly at my face with this judgmental expression that made my skin crawl. I could only respond with a shocked "excuse me." I was honestly stunned. Here I was, minding my own business, doing my job, and this man who I barely know felt entitled enough to share his unsolicited opinion about my appearance. What made it even worse was that he knew I had a boyfriend who works in the same store. The audacity of some people never ceases to amaze me. But you know what? His comment actually had the opposite effect of what he probably intended. Instead of making me feel self-conscious or wanting to tone down my makeup, it became my motivation to step up my game. I decided right then and there that if my makeup was such an effective creep repellent, I was going to use it to my advantage. For the next few weeks, I made it a point to wake up early before every shift, even the morning ones, to do a full face of makeup. We're talking foundation, contour, highlight, dramatic eyeshadow, the works. I even started getting up early enough to have a proper breakfast and do some morning yoga. Nothing like spite to fuel some positive life changes, right? Every time I see him now, he tries to greet me, and I just give him a simple nod and walk away. The look on his face when he sees me with even more elaborate makeup than before is amazing. He's tried to approach me a few times since then, probably to make more unwanted comments, but I've mastered the art of the quick exit. Just last week, he tried to corner me in the break room. He attempted to bring up his previous comments, but I quickly shut him down by telling him I was busy and walked right out, my glittery eyeshadow catching the fluorescent lights as I left. My boyfriend found out about the incident from another co-worker who witnessed it, and he couldn't stop laughing at how I handled it. He's been super supportive and even bought me a new eyeshadow palette to add to my collection. Yesterday, I overheard him complaining to another male co-worker about how some people are too sensitive these days. The other guy just shrugged and told him that maybe he should mind his own business. Karen, our department supervisor, caught wind of the situation and pulled me aside today. She tried to defend him, saying he was just trying to give me a compliment. I told her that a real compliment would be saying my makeup looks nice or saying nothing at all, and what he did was harassment. When she accused me of being dramatic, I asked if she'd prefer I discuss the matter with human resources instead. She backed off pretty quickly after that. I've documented everything, including dates and times, just in case. But the best revenge has been showing up every day looking absolutely fabulous. Knowing that my makeup isn't just making me feel confident, it's also keeping entitled people at bay. Now when I do my makeup, I think about how every swipe of eyeshadow and stroke of eyeliner is like putting on armor. Not because I need protection from comments like his, but because it reminds me that I don't exist for anyone else's approval or satisfaction. And if my sparkly eyeshadow offends someone's delicate sensibilities, well, that's just an added bonus. Let me share what happened last week with my grandmother. For context, I've been living with her for the past 3 years after graduating college. My parents suggested it since Grandma was getting older and needed help around the house, plus it helped me save money while starting my career. She's always been incredibly supportive and loving, helping me through college and cheering me on at every step. The whole situation started when my aunt called Grandma a few days ago. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard Grandma's voice rising from the living room. She never raises her voice, so I immediately knew something was wrong. I could hear them arguing about Grandma's decision, with my aunt insisting she couldn't be cut out of the will because she was her daughter. Grandma fired back that being her daughter didn't give her the right to treat her badly, pointing out how my aunt hadn't visited in 3 years and only called when she needed money. When my aunt accused Grandma of playing favorites, Grandma explained this wasn't about favorites, but about how my aunt had treated her and her sister's family. I heard more yelling, and then suddenly there was just silence. When I rushed to the living room, I found Grandma clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. I immediately called emergency services, and they got her to the hospital quickly. The doctors confirmed she had a heart attack, likely triggered by the stress of the argument. For 2 days, Grandma was recovering well. My mom and I took turns staying with her, making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. Then, on the 3rd day, while I was sitting with Grandma during my mom's lunch break, the door burst open. My aunt stormed in, her face red. Before I could even stand up, she walked straight to Grandma's bed. She started ranting about being cut out of the will, demanding to know if Grandma thought she could get away with it, and bragging about everything she claimed to have done for the family. I tried to stop her, reminding her that Grandma was still recovering, while Grandma weakly asked her to leave. But my aunt wasn't listening. In a move that still makes my blood boil, she grabbed Grandma's oxygen mask and yanked it off her face. She started screaming that Grandma needed to listen to her, that she deserved her share, and that she wouldn't leave until the will was changed. I immediately pressed the nurse call button while trying to stop my aunt from getting closer to Grandma. Thankfully, my mom returned at that exact moment. She demanded to know what my aunt was doing and told her to get away from Grandma. When my aunt tried to tell Mom to stay out of it, claiming this was between her and Grandma, Mom threatened to call the police. My aunt just scoffed, declaring she wouldn't leave until she got what she deserved. The hospital security arrived first, restraining my aunt while we got the oxygen mask back on Grandma. By the time the police arrived, my aunt was screaming about family betrayal and her rights as a daughter. They arrested her for assault, and the hospital staff documented everything for the police report. The security cameras caught everything. The district attorney is pressing charges, and the hospital has banned my aunt from the premises. Grandma's doing much better now, and she's actually updated her will again, this time explicitly stating that anyone who attempts to harm her or coerce her will be completely cut off, not just from inheritance but from any contact with the family. My aunt tried calling from jail, demanding we drop the charges, but Mom blocked her number. She's facing serious charges for assaulting an elderly person in a hospital setting. Turns out that's taken very seriously by the legal system. She's looking at potential jail time, and honestly, after what she did to my grandmother, I hope she gets it. I've been working as an emergency physician for about 40 years now. And let me tell you, you see all sorts of interesting cases in the emergency department. Some genuinely need immediate attention, others, well, let's just say they could have gone to their regular doctor instead. But what really gets to me isn't the patients. It's the ridiculous demands from their employers. This story happened during winter, which is always our busiest season. The emergency department was packed, as usual. Wait times were through the roof, and we were doing our best to handle cases based on severity rather than who came in first. That's just how emergency medicine works. The guy having a heart attack gets seen before the person with a sprained ankle, no matter who arrived first. I was going through my shift when I got assigned a new patient. The chart only said needs a work note. Now, usually, when I see something like this, I get a bit irritated. The emergency department isn't really the place for administrative paperwork, but I try to keep an open mind. When I walked into the cubicle, I immediately knew something was wrong. After 4 decades in emergency medicine, you develop a sort of sixth sense about these things. The patient was a woman who was clearly unwell. Her vitals weren't looking good at all. She had a fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit, her pulse was running a bit high, and her blood pressure was on the lower side. The cardiac monitor showed her heart was functioning okay at least. I asked her what brought her in today. Her response surprised me. She simply said she had a cold. I have to admit, I was a bit taken aback. Most people who come to the emergency department try to make their condition sound as dramatic as possible. They'll claim they have COVID, pneumonia, or even anthrax. Trust me, that's happened more times than you'd think. But this woman, she just straight up said she had a cold. I told her I appreciated her honesty and asked why she came to the emergency department for a cold. She explained that she'd been sick for 2 days, taking Tylenol and drinking lots of fluids, and her fever had actually gone down a bit. When I pressed further about why she came to the emergency department specifically, she revealed that her employer wanted a doctor's note for paid time off. I checked her records again. This woman had been sitting in our waiting room for 5.5 hours. 5.5 hours! Just to get a note for work. I couldn't believe it. I asked about her work situation, and she told me she'd been there for about 3 years. When I inquired about how much paid time off they would give her with a doctor's note, she said there was no limit. She just needed a doctor saying she needed it. Something clicked in my head at that moment. Here was this clearly sick woman who dragged herself to an emergency department and waited for over 5 hours just because her employer wouldn't take her word that she was ill. The kind of employer who'd rather have their employees clog up emergency departments during a busy winter season than trust them when they say they're sick. I confirmed with her again about there being no limit, and she assured me that was the case as long as a doctor certified it. I told her I would write her that note. I went to my computer and started typing. Now, usually for a cold, you might give someone 3 to 5 days off. But this employer, they wanted to play games? Fine, let's play. I told her that I was writing her a note for 2 weeks off, with pay, and if she wasn't feeling better by then, she could come back and I'd write her another one. The look of relief on her face was worth it. She probably expected just a couple of days. When she asked if I really meant 2 weeks, I explained that she was clearly unwell, and I wanted to make sure she had enough time to properly recover. I added that we wouldn't want her spreading this around her workplace. She left with her note, and I felt pretty good about myself. Sure, it was just a cold, but I'd also treated something else. A case of corporate stupidity. The kind that forces sick people to sit in emergency departments for hours, potentially exposing others to their illness just to prove they're actually sick. If her employer had any issues with a 2-week note, they'd have to explain why they're questioning an emergency physician's medical opinion. And trust me, I'd love to have that conversation. Sometimes the best treatment isn't just for the illness, it's for the ridiculous system that made the patient come to the emergency department in the first place. Let me give you some context. When I was 14, doctors discovered I had a tumor. It was a difficult time for my family and me, but we got through it together. I underwent various treatments, including chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation, in that specific order. It was a long journey, but I'm grateful to say I'm now in remission. Fast forward to my junior year in high school. I was sitting in advanced placement biology, a class I was interested in given my medical history. The teacher was new to our school and had that air of superiority about her that some teachers get when they think they know everything about their subject. That day, we were studying cells, specifically focusing on cancer cells and their treatments. The teacher was writing on the whiteboard, listing treatments in what she claimed was the only correct order: surgery first, then radiation, and finally chemotherapy. I knew from personal experience that this wasn't always the case. Treatment plans vary depending on the type of cancer and other factors. So I raised my hand and told her that I actually had these treatments in a different order when I had cancer. The teacher turned around slowly. She responded by telling me that what I was saying was impossible, insisting that the medical protocol clearly stated this was the proper order. I explained to her that I had chemotherapy first, then surgery, and finally radiation. She dismissed my experience, suggesting that I must be confused about my own treatment, emphasizing that she had studied this extensively. Several of my classmates started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them had known me since middle school and were aware of what I'd been through. One of my classmates spoke up, confirming that I was telling the truth and mentioning that they all remembered when I was going through treatment. The teacher's face reddened, but instead of acknowledging she might be wrong, she doubled down. She suggested that if that's what happened, then my doctors must have made a mistake and insisted this was the standard protocol. That's when I lost my patience. I pulled out my phone and offered to call my oncologist right then and there, saying they'd be happy to explain why different cancers required different treatment approaches. The teacher angrily told me to put my phone away, declaring that this wasn't up for discussion and emphasizing her position as the teacher. Another classmate tried to defend me, pointing out that I had literally experienced cancer and should know about it. The teacher responded by threatening the entire class with detention if anyone said another word about it. Just then, our department head walked past our classroom and noticed the tension. She stepped in to ask if everything was all right. Before the teacher could speak, I explained the situation to the department head, describing how I was trying to explain that cancer treatments can be administered in different orders depending on the type of cancer and individual cases, mentioning my personal experience. The department head, who had been at the school during my treatment, nodded understandingly. She suggested this would be a good opportunity to learn from someone with first-hand experience, noting that medical protocols often have variations based on individual cases. The teacher stood there, mouth agape, as the department head invited me to share my experience with the class. I explained how different types of cancers require different approaches and how my treatment plan was designed specifically for my case. The teacher didn't apologize, but she did spend the rest of the class sitting at her desk, silently fuming. The next day, she skipped over me during class participation, but I didn't mind. I had made my point. The department head later asked me to give a presentation to all the biology classes about my experience with cancer treatment, emphasizing how medical protocols often need to be personalized. I made sure to schedule it during my teacher's free period so she could attend and learn from my expertise. She didn't show up to the presentation, but I heard she started teaching that section differently, acknowledging that treatment orders can vary. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.